Hi, welcome to my yoga studio. I'm comparing the process of writing a yoga teacher training program with the organization of a doctoral dissertation. And the reason why I'm doing this comparison is because I am a doctoral student and I'm also an online yoga teacher, and I'm interested in innovative ways to teach online, specifically how to minimize the distance between teacher and learner and how to grow knowledge with the use of technology. So, I read two dissertations, both focusing on learning management systems and lifelong learning literacies. Reading two dissertations was a lot. They are long, they're painstaking, they're deeply personal, and they're highly specialized. And as I was reading them, I thought to myself, this is really similar to the process that it took me to write my yoga teacher training. It was a similarly arduous process of transformation. It was a process of questioning, understanding, explaining, and suggesting. Now, these four keywords, they are organizational cornerstones that I extracted from one of the dissertations that I read, from Chokwe's dissertation. And they were threads that were spun throughout the 300 plus word dissertation. And it kept me on track as the reader to know what the objectives and the outcome of the study were. Now, when I was writing my yoga teacher training, I had a similar objective for my future students, is that when they were proceeding through the 200-hour course, they would be able to follow along with an organizational cornerstone that would keep them understanding what the purpose of their yoga training was, whatever that is for them. So these four keywords that I extracted from one of the dissertations that I read, that was the first of 8 qualities that I think are important for a dissertation. Plain language without the use of jargon, content organized into chapters and sections, a thread throughout that supports the argument, a literature review that's relevant, quotations that support rather than obscure the text, and an explanation of the process and the outcomes of the research, and finally, a good abstract. Plain language. I realize that the nuance and the specialization of writing a dissertation sometimes requires technical terms that are specific to the topic of hand. And it's the same with writing a yoga book. Sometimes there's certain esoteric words that are just necessary and appropriate to use with students. Plain language is a strategy for distributing information in a way that the reader can tackle it one time rather than reading it multiple times through. So in the case of these two dissertations on learning management, two plain language examples that I found in the dissertations were community of inquiry and the Carnegie unit. So the example, it's not that they didn't use these words, it's not that they didn't use the word community of inquiry or the acronym, and it's not that the other writer didn't use the Carnegie unit as a descriptor of, it's a descriptor of hours to credit. But, I noticed that the author was really careful about not using the acronym throughout the book, not assuming that the reader is going to know the acronym the whole time. And same with the Carnegie unit. Instead of saying the word Carnegie unit over and over again, he did say the full word hours to credit. In the yoga classes that I teach, an example is the use of Sanskrit words. I could assume that my students have heard these Sanskrit words. They're very common for the names of poses. But instead of constantly using these technical terms, I make sure to use a combination of both, the Sanskrit words and the non-Sanskrit words. Plain language is clear and organized writing. It's this strategy for sharing information with the reader, and it works really well because it's for complex ideas, because it helps the reader understand what is being said. It organizes the ideas into paragraphs, and it only uses words that are appropriate for the reader. So that does mean that technical words can be used. But in the case of conducting my own research, I expect that I'm going to have to read and reread a lot of information on the topic at hand, including technical and complicated documents. But when it comes time to write the dissertation, I want my reader to have a really good idea of what I'm trying to convey the first time they read through the thesis. Plain language without excessive jargon is the strategy to do this. So these next two sections, I'm going to use a screen share just to show you what I've been working on. So the sections on the thread of idea throughout the dissertations and the use of sections and chapters. I'm going to use a screen share. Please join me. Hello. Right here on the left, I have open Chokwe's dissertation. On the right, I have open Stephen Allen's dissertation. And then down here, I have my yoga teacher training manual open in Word. I want to demonstrate the importance of using chapter headings and sections. The length and the depth of these dissertations calls for well-organized sections. Both Chokwe and Allen failed at adding chapters to their PDF. I don't know if this is a style thing or if dissertations traditionally don't use section titles for chapters, but chapter headings at the bottom of the page would have been helpful. It's really difficult to read a 300+ page dissertation in one go, and having section titles, I'm scrolling down, having section titles here in the header or in the footer would have gone a long way to making these documents more readable. So, as you can see, this is the table of contents. Chokwe has really great chapter headings. He has subchapters, he has sub-subchapters. He's done a really great job of organizing it. But for whatever reason, he didn't add headers and footers as the chapter headings in the individual sections. So when you're reading through it, it's quite difficult to follow. Alan Stephen did the same thing. You will see again, he has really great chapter headings organized. He has subchapters. He has a great table of contents. So if I want to click on something, I can go back up to the table of contents and go to the page number. But if I was to read the book through as a PDF or to print it, it would be really nice if he had put headers that included the individual chapter sections. What they end up looking like without those is more like a big essay, which is fine, but these are more like a book. So I want to show you how I organized my yoga teacher training manual. This is in Word, and I organized it according to the chapter sections and headings. We'll go to this section. Each of my sections, at the top, it has the title of that corresponds to the section, page number, and then on the next page it has the section title on the opposite page. So what this means is that when you open the book up as a book, it means that the two pages will open up and they'll be always on the outer right hand side, as you know which section you're in. I even went so far as to organize into individual sections. So here, for example, this is the yoga asana, that's the chapter section. This is the subchapter, sun salutations. The way I did this is I made sure when I was organizing the textbook is that each section had a section break following the end of the section. So this is the end of the yoga asana section. This is the beginning of the sun salutation section. It's a new section, section 16. That's section 15. And then the odd page headers are different from the even page headers, and it means that I can put the titles at the top of the Word document. And you can see up here in the user panel for Word, you can select different odd and even pages and show the document text. The other critical thing is that you do not link the sections to the previous. Each section is its own entity, and that means that you can associate the name of the chapter with the section. Word is this extraordinarily powerful application to create books, and I think that Alan, in his dissertation up here, Chokwe, in his dissertation up here, it would have gone a long way to organize their sections and chapters using headers and footers so that the reader can follow along where they are. Thank you. The thread that supports the argument. This was one of the most important qualities of the dissertations. And right away when I was reading it, I noticed that Stephen Allen's thread was this walled garden learning management system. And he likened that to, well, he compared a walled garden to learning management systems. And I saw it throughout the text that he was opening up the idea that learning management systems need to be distributed among users
among administration, among teachers. All parties need to be part of the input of how learning management systems are created. And that was a thread that was obvious throughout his entire dissertation. He compares learning management systems directly to walled gardens, and it's a really convenient image to understand the context from which he conducted his research. I was really inspired by those two disparate images, learning management systems, which can be difficult to conceptualize in our minds, and walled gardens, of course, and that brings together English gardens, where you have this independent place where you go to, where your neighbors can't come. But his vision is that learning management systems are opened up so that administration, users, students, teachers, all interested parties are contributing to how the learning management systems are organized. This is Chokwei's thread, and his thread was the e-learning paradox. E-learning is considered a powerful, cutting-edge technology to improve higher education, while on the contrary, it is reluctantly accepted by students and lecturers. And this was his paradox that he mentioned throughout his entire dissertation. The e-learning paradox he describes as illustrating the lack of accessibility in rural South Africa. His dissertation is about e-learning management systems being available to students in South Africa. And he reminds readers that rural South Africa is still a divided third world country where accessibility and bandwidths are legitimate challenges for students. So he really had many opportunities throughout his dissertation to discuss the e-learning paradox. And he took the opportunity to study this phenomenon where staff and students' perceptions and acceptance of e-learning management systems are different than the actual implementation of the system. Finally, in my yoga teacher training program, my thread is that yoga is a lifelong journey. And this is a thread, the idea of a journey, the idea of a path. This is a thread that exists throughout the entire program. Specifically, I want to draw your attention to the 8-step path here for sequencing Hatha yoga. This is something that I came up with on my own, and it's intended to illustrate how yoga really is a journey. It starts with one step, it culminates in a final step, and there's a whole string of ideas that come in between step 1 and step 8. Yoga is a path, it's a lifelong journey, and the thread that I created throughout my yoga teacher training is that yoga is this guide towards ease and flow to be able to coexist peacefully with the world around you. Thank you so much for listening in. That was the discussion about threads that support the argument throughout a dissertation or throughout a course.
I gauged the quality of the literature review by the relevance of the keyword search. So Alan, in his dissertation, specifically said that he derived the themes of his literature review from his research. And a robust literature review really should cover the range of topics in the dissertation. Chokwei covered the history of online and distance learning all the way to the debate about digital natives and digital immigrants. And this was illustrations of his theme of the perceptions and acceptance of e-learning literacy. A good literature review, a quality literature review, will illustrate the argument, and it is a narrative to advance the themes. It would be poor style to simply summarize the contents of the bibliography. And both of these, both Chokwei and Alan, did a really great exemplary job of organizing their literature review according to the key themes of their research. In my own yoga teacher training course, one of the assignments is for students to review relevant books. I have a whole library of books that I offer them, or they can find any relevant yoga book pertinent to their own personal interests. And they create a themed class. So they extract themes from the literature that they review, and then they share key ideas with their comrades, their cohort. A good, robust literature review is an illustration of the author's theme. It's a narrative that advances the themes that the author has presented in his paper, his dissertation, in his course. The use of quotations. It should enhance and support the text rather than obscure it. Writing a dissertation is an extraordinary effort. It's a monumental effort of research and producing an original idea. And it's a relatively rare feat, and it will require standing on the shoulders of great thinkers that came before me. A dissertation is an original contribution to the field, and doing the research and writing the thesis, it's tempting to lean on the exquisite research of great thinkers from before me. And certainly the effort of writing must acknowledge the efforts of my peers and mentors. But their work should not obscure my own work. The intention of using quotations is to support rather than obscure the effort of my own contribution, my own extraordinary original contribution to the field. So here's an example from Chokwe. He uses a quotation to support his point, not obscure it. Here's an example from Alan, same thing. Uses a quote, supports his point, doesn't obscure the point, doesn't obscure his text. And here's an example from me, using a quotation to support my point about meditation, but not to obscure my own articulation on the qualities and the purpose of meditation. Quotations are an acknowledgement of the research and the effort and the scaffolding that goes on in any particular field where we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. But it's really important that they don't obscure the text and they just support my own unique original contribution to the field. Describing the research process and the outcome is a strategy to encourage the readers to care. The dissertation is really just a fraction of the project of completing a doctoral degree. And by heralding the efforts of the research and the intricacies of the research, the value of the work can be enhanced. So, for example, Alan explains his methodology by articulating why he was interested in the problem. In another example, Chokwe describes detail of his study by explaining who was invited to participate. Chokwe also includes the criteria for his research project. By describing the process, the purpose, and the criteria of the research, both writers encourage readers to care about the production of the dissertation and to care about future implications for the results. In my own project, in my yoga teacher training, I describe the process of researching and writing my textbook as a reflection of how yoga fits into my life. And in the same manner, by describing the complexity and the process of the research that it took to write the textbook and to create the course, I encourage my students to care about the process of fitting yoga into their own lives. By describing the process and the outcomes and the production of the research efforts, the authors of the dissertation or the authors of a course, in my case, we encourage the reader or the participant to care about the outcome and the implications of the study. Finally, the abstract. When I was searching for 2 dissertations for this project, I was exclusively reading abstracts and not looking at the content of any potential dissertations. The abstract has to capture the reader's attention, effectively summarize the contents of the dissertation, and as well as the purpose and the outcome of the research. And furthermore, the abstract definitely should not just be an excerpt from the text. It needs to make sense on its own, and it needs to not require any outside sources. Obviously, since I selected these 2 dissertations, I felt that their abstracts were appropriately intriguing to warrant a full read and review of the contents. I am interested in innovative ways to teach online, specifically how to minimize the distance between teacher and learner and how to use technology to enhance the growth of knowledge. I initially selected these 2 dissertations based on their concise and explanatory abstracts. As I delved into the contents of Alan and Chokwe's dissertations, I was inspired by the keywords question, understand, explain, suggest. And from that framework of inquiry, I extracted 7 qualities of a good dissertation. In the process, I compared the production of a dissertation to the creation of my yoga training course. And I felt this comparison was valid because they both represent deep research, quality review of relevant literature. They all use plain language, well-placed quotations to enhance the argument, and include a description of the research process. This project was an inspired moment to investigate how dissertations are constructed, organized, and presented to their audience, starting with the abstract, concluding with the outcome of the research and the suggestion for future inquiry. The intention behind my project and the comparison between a past project that I've worked on, my yoga teacher training course, was to inspire myself for the future writing of a dissertation whenever that comes. Thank you so much for joining me.